Repeat after me. Did. I did it. S did it. H did it. Letter T, da. Da da. O, da da da. Those are the dashes of the alphabet.
In 1848, Samuel Morse invented the first electric telegraph. This innovation provided a secure and rapid means of long-distance communication. Although there were many civilian applications of this innovative technology, the impact on military communication during the Civil War signified the Union's victory over the Confederacy.
Prior to the electric telegraph, many civilians wrote letters to communicate with one another. This was difficult to manage as it took weeks and sometimes months for a letter to reach from one person to another. Many scientists worked on developing and modernizing our ways of communication as communication shaped our country and was needed to expand during the 18th and 19th centuries, times of war and depression. Samuel Morse brought in something new to our country and the world as a whole.
Samuel F.B. Morse was born in Charlestown, Massachusetts in 1791. He had an interest in history and was a talented painter aside from creating the first wired telegraph and being part of the invention of the Morse code. As electricity was discovered, wires were being stretched from one pole to another, and an electric current put the signal to flow through the wires by the use of a switch. Electricity allowed society to develop. We were able to have better lighting and better communication.
The electric current was first used to make various marks on paper, which were used to signify a special character. With European influence of electricity, Samuel Morse realized that these markings and clicking noises could be used for communication. He developed the electric telegraph system as an electrical circuit connecting three parts to a wire. A battery would supply the electricity, and a switch was used to carry out or break the circuit, causing a sound to be made each time the switch clicked. An electromagnet would detect the amount of electricity, and it consisted of a coiled wire which pulled on a piece of metal each time the current flowed by.
Samuel Morse used the electromagnet to move a pencil instead of a piece of metal, marking a piece of paper. Long markings and short markings would determine a different character, as the switch would be held for a long time or short time. The development of the Morse code was the assigning of different length marks to a different letter of the alphabet, and was recorded on a paper tape, referred to as register. Morse modified the code by using dots and dashes rather than 26 different lengths of line.
As Samuel Morse introduced this idea to the American government in 1838, he was more so denied than praised for his invention. The American people did not see much important use to the system at the time, and so Morse introduced the invention to Europe. It was not until 5 years later that the American government rekindled with the idea and sent the first electric telegram from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland. The message read, "What hath God wrought?"
Once again, the electric telegraph wasn't seen as much of a use during this time. Yet, 18 years later, when the Civil War began, in 1861, communication was crucially necessary for generals to send messages to their soldiers, and for the government to have military communication with the people working underneath them. Being one of the deadliest and most violent wars that America has fought, the Civil War marked a great chapter in Americans' history. The northern and southern states initiated a war with each other as a result of economic differences, state and federal rights, slavery issues, and the election of Abraham Lincoln, amongst others.
The electric telegraph was first put into use by General George B. McClellan. McClellan had had previous indirect experience with the telegraph as he was assigned to the Crimean War, during which the European governments used the telegraph to communicate with their headquarters. As McClellan became involved in the Civil War, he made electric telegraphs part of his operations. McClellan appointed Western Union's Anton Stagger to carry out an operation involving the electric telegraph. Ultimately, McClellan successfully set up the first moving telegraph, which moved as the troops proceeded during late May of 1861.
During the first battles of the Civil War, the office, or rather the president officials, were very inactive with the battles that occurred. Two of the major and starting battles fought during the war were the first and second Bull Run battles. These battles occurred in northern Virginia in a town called Manassas Junction. The first collision during the battle was on July 21st, 1861. Though the battlefield was located only 30 miles from the capital, Lincoln and his officers were very inactive due to the lack of communication. At the time, a man by the name Andrew Carnegie, a Pennsylvania railroad supervisor, was given the job of extending a telegraph line into northern Virginia. It wasn't until after the actual battle that the cables were able to extend into Manassas Junction.
And so instead, a man by the name of Thaddeus Lowe decided to run a telegraph cable from a hot air balloon down to the ground. The capital location of the balloon gave a view which extended all the way into Manassas Junction. With this, Lowe was able to communicate to Lincoln what actions were being taken during the battle. The hot air balloon was not much of a success, but it did allow Lowe to report the movement of the Confederates in towards the capital with the aid of the electric telegraph, ultimately aiding the Union Army with its positioning.
When the Second Bull Run battle was fought between August 28th and August 30th of 1862, Lincoln was in constant communication with the front. Despite the fact that the telegraph lines leading to the leader of the Union Army, General John Pope, were cut by the Confederate Army, Lincoln was able to keep military communication. He kept communication with a lower-ranked general by the name of Herman Haupt, hence making these telegraphs the best source of information at one point.
Telegraphs provided a means of communication for tactical purposes amongst the Union. Through telegrams and much spent time in telegraph offices, Lincoln was able to command the troops even though he was not physically present during the battles. Previously in history, it was common for the chief commander to be with their army to supervise that all orders were executed, yet the telegraph allowed Abraham Lincoln to look after the nation and command the military without having to be present at the battles. In the Gettysburg Campaign on June 10, 1863, Lincoln through a telegraph redirected General Joseph Hooker into destroying the enemy rather than obtaining land. "If left to me, I would not go south of the Rappahannock upon Lee's moving north of it. I think Lee's army, and not Richmond, is your true objective."
The electric telegraph was essential for the communication between the President and authorities at the Capitol and the Union troops. The immediate direction of the troops was made possible by notifications passed through telegraphs. Such an example occurred preceding the Battle of Chickamauga, as direction under Thomas A. Scott allowed for transportation of over 1,000 troops moving from Virginia to Tennessee within 11 days.
Samuel Morse's invention of the telegraph changed the way society communicated amongst itself, but most importantly revolutionized military communication. After the Civil War ended, the usage of the electric telegraph continued to win popularity, leading into an era in which the public took advantage of the innovation. Within the military usage, the electric telegraph continued to be used as a secure and reliable means of communication between distant parties. The electric telegraph continued to provide the same services it had during the Civil War. The method used by the military to communicate with each other changed as technological research increased, yet the fundamentals for which these new innovations are used for remains the same.
During World War II, even though the radio was an easier manner of communication between the military, many times the military would send telegraph messages which were more secure and less likely to be eavesdropped than the radio. The fundamentals for writing in secret code is still used within the military, as the Air Force has been taught a variation of the Morse code, to be able to communicate without the risk of screwing out the operation.
The 18th century innovation of the electric telegraph by Samuel Morse provided change in history by aiding the military in one of America's most defining wars, the American Civil War. If the means of communication had not been so rapid and efficient, the legacy of the Union would not have been such a success. The Confederates had the upper hand in the Civil War, but because of the innovation of the electric telegraph, the job of chief commander was able to be fulfilled by a president for the first time in American history. The invention of the electric telegraph has allowed society to develop communication and modernize technological appliances to benefit our time and variety of communication.